friends, my name is Sarah, and today I'm here to share with you my November reading wrap-up. So we're over halfway through December at this point, and this wrap-up is super late, but that's because the first couple weeks in December were a little bit crazy. However, November was a really great reading month. I got a good bit done. I actually reread more than I read new books, and so I really loved most of the books that I read because I was rereading a lot of my favorites, and I also got to go to YALLFest in Charleston and hang out with some wonderful bookish friends. I did a vlog and a collab video from that event, and so if you have not checked those out already, I will link them in the description box below. But this wrap-up is, like I said, already super late, so we're just gonna jump on in to all of the stuff. Starting with the statistics, in the month of November, I read a grand total of 10 books for a combined 3,972 pages with an average of 397 pages per book. 4 of those books were new reads and 6 of them were rereads. 8 of them were part of a series and 2 of them were standalones. In regard to the genre, 4 of the books were fantasy, 2 of them were historical fiction, 2 of them were classics, 1 was faith or theology, and the other was contemporary. 4 of those books were for an adult audience, 2 of them were for a young adult audience, and 4 of them were for a children or middle grade audience. Looking at the character diversity, 2 of the books had no diverse characters represented in them, 5 of them had characters of ethnic diversity, 2 of them had multiple kinds of diverse characters represented, and 1 of the books was nonfiction and therefore did not have any characters in it. Looking specifically at the protagonists, 3 of those books had diverse protagonists, 6 of them did not, and once again 1 was nonfiction and therefore did not have a protagonist. Moving on to the setting, 1 of the books was once again nonfiction and therefore did not have a setting. 1 of the books took place in multiple locations. 2 of the books took place in a fantasy setting. 1 of the books took place in the United States. 2 took place in Canada. 2 took place in the United Kingdom, and 1 took place in Italy. Looking at the author gender, 2 of the books were written by men and 8 of them were written by women. In regard to the publication year, 2 of the books were published in or before the 1920s. 1 of the books was published in the 1940s. 2 were published in the 1990s. 2 were published in the 2000s. 2 were published between 2010 and 2015, and 1 was published in 2016. And finally, for the star ratings, I gave 1 book 3.5 stars, 3 books 4 stars, 4 books 4.5 stars, and 2 books 5 stars for an average star rating of 4.35. And now let us move on to the books. Up first we have Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. Continuing on with my 4th reread of the series, I jumped into book number 4 at the beginning of the month. Goblet of Fire is neither my favorite nor my least favorite of the books. I really enjoy how the story gets a lot more complex within this novel. Obviously, we nearly double, almost triple in size from some of the early books as we do in this particular book, so there's a lot more space for development of plot and character, and I love how some of the threads that J.K. Rowling started planting in the first and second books start to weave together in this one. We get the introduction of some really fascinating things. I love seeing the different schools come together and how the new characters that are introduced in this novel come into play throughout the story, and I love in particular the continued development of Hermione in this book. Obviously, up until this point, she's been an integral part of the series and we have seen a lot of growth from her, but you see new sides of her in this particular book. The 2 sides that I really love seeing most from her are, 1, you see Hermione as like this pioneer for social justice as she starts the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, and I also really love her relationship with Victor because you just see Hermione as a girl, and not that you haven't seen her as that before, but you see in the way that Ron and Harry in particular respond to this that they have sort of started to come to see her as one of the guys, and so I just love that representation that you can still be smart and bookish and care about things like social justice and the like, but also still be feminine and a girl and all of those wonderful things. So like I said, though this is not my favorite, it is definitely not my least favorite, but I still very much enjoy it. Up next we have Rainbow Valley by Ellen Montgomery. This is the 7th book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and this was my 2nd read of the series as a whole. In this particular book, we jump from focusing on Anne as a main character to focusing on the stories of the oldest 5 of her 6 children and another family of kids that they spend a lot of time with, and it's delightful. This book is sort of a representation of everything that the Anne of Green Gables series is, which is just lovely, wonderful little anecdotes about kids living their normal life and being precocious and ridiculous and wonderful, and I don't have quite as much love for it as I do for the first couple books in the series because once again we shift from Anne to her children, but I do love seeing how Anne interacts with her kids in this particular book even though she's not as much in the forefront, and I love seeing how her imagination and her personality and her just vivaciousness and stuff has transferred to her children and how she has influenced them to be the children that they are. But I really just love this series as a whole, even though this isn't my favorite of the 8. Up next we have The Girl Who Flew Over Fairyland and Cut the Moon in Two by Catherine M. Valente. This is the 3rd book in the Fairyland series, which is an incredible series. My favorite thing about this book series as a whole is just Catherine Valente's writing style. It is exquisite and amazing, and I write down so many quotes from these books because they are just phenomenal. This is my favorite book in the series so far, by far. I absolutely loved it. Beyond just having wonderful characters and a beautiful, incredible, and fascinating world that Catherine Valente has created, the way that she writes and the way that she tells the stories, the narration that she gives to them just puts it over the top from a series that would be fun and inventive and imaginative into a series that just touches your heart and your soul, and I adored every little thing about this book. If you have not checked out the Fairyland series yet, just go read it. It's wonderful. Up next we have Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling. Continuing again with my reread of the series, we came to Order of the Phoenix, which is the book I have a very much love-hate relationship with. I love a lot of the things that you start to learn about certain characters in this particular book. I especially love the development of Neville as a character and the introduction of Luna Lovegood, but there are other things about this book that I really just can't stand. For example, Angsty Harry drives me absolutely crazy. I understand it on some levels, but he still bothers me. And then obviously, I consistently want to punch Dolores Umbridge in the throat. She is a fantastic character because she is designed to be a character that you hate, but I just, every time I think it's not possible to hate Dolores Umbridge more, but every time I read this book, I just more and more just anger and general hatred for her comes out. But Dolores Umbridge brings out Sassy McGonagall, and Sassy McGonagall is my favorite. So this, again, is the book that I have the love-hate relationship with. It is the behemoth of the series, but as always, I very much enjoyed it, and obviously I would highly recommend you read the Harry Potter series in general because, you know, I kind of love it. Up next we have A Voice in the Wind and An Echo in the Darkness, the first 2 books in the Mark of the Lion trilogy by Francine Rivers. Like I said, these are the first 2 books in the Mark of the Lion trilogy, which is a Christian historical fiction series that follows 4 main characters in post-Nero 1st century Rome primarily. I read these books for the first time almost 10 years ago. I absolutely fell in love with them. This is my 4th or 5th read of the series, and to be perfectly honest, I probably can't give you any kind of objective opinion about this series because I just have such an emotional attachment to them that even as I read them and I notice things that I maybe didn't notice the first time around that could potentially be problematic, like I love the series as a whole. I love the characters, I love the story, I love the writing. If you are a fan of historical fiction, then I would recommend this. However, if you are not a fan of faith being a very prevalent thing within stories, then I would not recommend it because, like I said, this is a Christian fiction series, and really the crux of the story is how the faith of one of the main characters affects everyone else in the story. So faith is a very integral part of the story, a very integral part of the character development, and just you can't really escape it. So if you don't like that in your books, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you don't mind it or you enjoy it and you are a fan of historical fiction, I would definitely recommend checking this one out. Up next we have The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. I did not enjoy this as much as I've enjoyed some of his other books. There were certain chapters that were just a little bit hard to wrap my head around. It definitely is one of those Lewis books that makes your head kind of hurt. But there were 2 chapters in particular, the one on divine goodness and the one on heaven, that I fell head over heels for. I absolutely loved it. In this particular book, as you might guess from the title, C.S. Lewis basically tackles the existence of pain in the world and how we are able to reconcile that in the Christian faith with the existence of a good God. How does a good God exist and allow pain in this world? And he sort of just starts with the idea of pain and works through divine goodness and going through human pain and different kinds of pain and just the way Lewis generally sort of lays out his argument. He's very logical, very practical in the way that he approaches things, which again, sometimes makes your head hurt a little bit, but this one is definitely worth a read, especially if you are a Lewis fan. Up next we have The Boy Who Lost Fairyland by Catherine M. Valente, which is the 4th book in the Fairyland series. This book takes a slightly different turn than the first 3 books in the series because rather than following the adventures of September, we sort of take a detour and hang out with another character who is from Fairyland, and I don't want to give too much away just because it would maybe spoil things a little bit, but there were elements of the story that I didn't love quite as much because we weren't spending time with the characters of September and Saturday and Elle and the others that I have come to know and love through the first 3 books of the series. But Catherine Valente's writing style, like I said, in regard to the 3rd book, is probably my favorite thing about this series, and that is still super prevalent throughout this book. They're just so beautifully written, so exquisite, and even though we didn't spend nearly as much time with September in this particular book as we did in the first 3 books in the series, I still really enjoyed it, and legitimately, I could not recommend this series enough. I did particularly love the introduction of Blunderbuss as a new character in this book, and I do love Tamburlaine and Hawthorne, and everything about this series, it's just wonderful. I could gush about it for a long time. There's probably going to be a lot of gushing when I finish it and try to do some sort of full series review, but just go read them because they're amazing. Up next we have Rilla of Ingleside by L.M. Montgomery, the 8th and final book in the Anne of Green Gables series. So Rainbow Valley, like I said, transitions the view from Anne to her children, and this 8th and final book follows the story of Rilla, Anne's youngest daughter. And this one is a little bit different from the rest of the series because most of the rest of the series is just Anne or her children living life, and it's just anecdotes about how life goes on for them and how this vivacious, wonderful character brings joy and beauty to all of the things that she encounters. In this particular book, it starts with the start of World War I, and so it's really about Rilla and how she goes through World War I living back in Canada while her brothers and her friends are going off to war, and how that affects her, how it changes her, how it makes her grow up perhaps faster than she or her parents would have potentially liked. And Rilla is a very different character from her mother, but she is still delightful and wonderful to read about, and I love how you see her growth throughout the story. She starts as a very sort of selfish, self-centered, shallow, just teenage girl, and by the end of the story she has grown in her kindness and her patience and her maturity. Like I said, these last 2 books are not my favorite in the series because I just have such a deep love for Anne as a character, but I do still really love this story as a whole, and it just brings everything to a wonderful close and full circle, and I could gush about it for a long time. And finally we have Long Way Gone by Charles Martin. A friend of mine at my church gave me this book and recommended I read it. It is a Christian fiction novel that is sort of like a loose retelling of the story of the prodigal son. It follows a guy named Cooper O'Connor who grew up with his father, who's a traveling preacher, and then one day had this really huge argument with him and leaves him to go to Nashville. And Cooper has trained his whole life as a musician, and so he takes off for Nashville to sort of make it, and he meets this girl and they hit it off as a partnership, but then tragedy strikes, and now 20 years later they sort of meet up again by chance. And so the book is split into 3 parts. The first part starts with them reconnecting after 20 years, and you work through a certain point in the story, and then you sort of pause and go back and get the full backstory of him growing up as a kid and how he came to love music, how he went to Nashville, how he met this girl, how the tragedy happened, all this, that, and the other thing. And then once you've gotten all that backstory, you come back and sort of finish out the story. And I'm not usually a huge fan of that kind of backstory development. I much prefer that it's sort of sprinkled in as you're working your way through a book, but it did work fairly well within this novel. There wasn't necessarily anything about it that I, to die for, loved. The characters were fairly well developed. The story itself was relatively intriguing. The writing was fine, but nothing amazing, nothing horrible. It was an enjoyable read. It was a quick read, just nothing to write home about. Well, there you have it, friends. That is my November wrap-up. If you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments below. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads, all at Zarian Hayes. The links to those profiles will also be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!